All right, everybody, we are live for another Fantrax Football Friday here on the Fantrax social media channels. That's Twitter and YouTube. My name is Colin McTamany. I'm running solo here today to talk about the NFL. There really is no offseason. We're 2 weeks now into the free agency period of the new league year. We're less than a week away from the MLB's opening day. So if you're not playing on Fantrax, switch your leagues over, start a league now. I know I just started a fantasy baseball league that I'm commissioner of, but we're here today to talk NFL as we do every Friday here on Fantrax. And there's also a ton of stuff going on there. So make sure you go to fantraxhq.com to check it out. An article I released today was one fact to consider for fantasy football teams from each of the 32 NFL teams. I myself actually turned 32 earlier this week. So I love writing about football. Why not have a little bit of fun the week of my birthday to write about each of the NFL teams? So what we're going to do today is discuss that article. I'm going to discuss each fact for each NFL team and apply it to fantasy football. Get you thinking a little bit. Even though we are 6 months away from week one, it's never too early to start thinking about the next NFL season or dynasty. So as you can see here on the banner, this is one fact for each NFL team to consider for fantasy football. And we'll go alphabetically here. We will start with the Arizona Cardinals, who I kind of like what they're doing this offseason. They currently hold the 4th overall pick, but the fact that I want to talk about here today for the Arizona Cardinals is that there are 38% of their 2023 targets vacated by Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, and Zach Ertz. Marquise Brown, of course, we know is now a Kansas City Chief. Rondale Moore was shipped over to Atlanta for Desmond Ridder, and Zach Ertz is now on the Washington Commanders. So those three players leaving has vacated 38% of their targets from last season. Now, with the 4th overall pick, I definitely expect them to add a wide receiver, considering that their best wide receiver right now might be Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson. They definitely need an alpha in there, especially with Kyler Murray under center at quarterback and under contract. So I think myself and the whole world expects them to add Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe Malik Neighbors at 4. So 38% of targets last year vacated. That receiver coming in is going to get a huge chunk of them. But the player that I think is going to benefit the most is tight end Trey McBride. And I love him for Dynasty Fantasy Football. I know we saw a ton of rookie tight ends explode onto the scene last year. Sam Laporta, Luke Musgrave. Still haven't seen a ton from Michael Mayer, Dalton Kincaid. But Trey McBride, he's been in the league a couple seasons now, finally had that breakout last year. He actually led the team with 106 targets last year. Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore were 2nd and 3rd in targets. Again, they're both gone. So Trey McBride, huge beneficiary of these vacated targets. This is the kind of stuff you want to be looking at moving into the next season. Who's going to get that piece of the pie? And it's Trey McBride for me. He had 8.5 targets per game without Zach Ertz on the field last year. If you extrapolate that over the full 17-game season, that would have tied TJ Hawkinson for most targets per game this last season. So Trey McBride, definitely going to be a hot name. I don't know if he's going to be drafted top 3, probably top 5 amongst tight ends for 2024, but he's a guy that I'm waiting to wait a little bit later to get in my 2024 drafts and someone I'm looking to acquire in Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. Not everyone has to be a buy low in Dynasty. You can just pay what they're worth, and I think Trey McBride is worth it. The next fact here, going alphabetically amongst the NFL teams, is the Atlanta Falcons. And the fact I have for this team is more about their newly acquired quarterback, and that's Kirk Cousins. He has thrown for 4,000 or more passing yards in 7 of his last 8 seasons prior to the 2023 season in which he tore his Achilles. So 7 of the last 8 seasons, Kirk Cousins has topped 4,000 passing yards. The Atlanta Falcons have not had a 4,000-yard passer since Matt Ryan in 2020. It's been a while. Obviously, Atlanta Falcons know that, or fans know that, because they've suffered through the quarterback play since Matt Ryan. Collectively, there have been a couple quarterbacks that have actually thrown passes for this team. Mariota, Heineke, Desmond Ridder. If you take each season, 2021, 2022, and 2023, and put them all together, each season, the quarterbacks that threw the ball, collectively, they haven't reached 4,000 passing yards. This team has just not been good and efficient on offense. There's really no excuse considering Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and now Bijan Robinson there. Good pass catching back. The big piece here for me, though, is Kirk Cousins is not only joining the team, but Zach Robinson is the offensive coordinator. He comes from the Sean McVay coaching tree out there in Los Angeles amongst the Rams. Kevin O'Connell, Kirk Cousins' former head coach in Minnesota, also from the Sean McVay coaching tree. So I really like that continuity of coming from, the same system there, working with Kirk Cousins. I think this team is going to be absolutely worth the investment for fantasy football. I know some people see the hype building, don't really want to pay what those players are going to be worth in drafts. I think the Atlanta Falcons are absolutely going to be worth it. Kirk Cousins, I don't think is going to be expensive in drafts. I think people are going to see him coming off the Achilles tear. And are going to be spending more higher draft capital on London Pitts, Bijan Robinson. But Kirk Cousins is not only throwing to those three, he's got Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore joining into the mix. So he's got a ton of weapons in that passing game. I think if you can get Kirk Cousins later in your 2024 drafts, it's going to be definitely worth it, especially for 1 QB leagues. He's never averaged 20 points per game in fantasy football. I think 2024 could be that year for him. Next up here, we have the Baltimore Ravens. And the fact I have for them is that Gus Edwards, Melvin Gordon, J.K. Dobbins, and Keaton Mitchell scored a combined 18 rushing touchdowns last year. Now, of course, we know Gus Edwards scored 13 of his own, but Gus Edwards is now a Los Angeles Charger. Melvin Gordon and J.K. Dobbins are still on the free agency market, and Keaton Mitchell tore his ACL in Week 15. So we could feasibly see all 4 of these backs not on the Baltimore Ravens or not, producing for the Baltimore Ravens in 2024. I definitely expect Keaton Mitchell back, but when and how efficient is he going to be? So enter a guy named Derrick Henry, who we all know who he is. We were all waiting to see where he was going to end up in free agency, and I love the landing spot for him. I think a lot of people expected him to be on a team like the Baltimore Ravens. The 18 touchdowns scored by Edwards, Gordon, Dobbins, and Mitchell make up 69% of the Ravens' 26 rushing scores last year. So you have Derrick Henry coming in here, who's obviously used to a heavy workload. He's scored 82 rushing touchdowns of his own over the last 6 seasons, and 65 of them, 79%, were scored in the red zone. I think if the Baltimore Ravens do get in the red zone, there's only one guy that's going to be getting the ball, and that's Derrick Henry. Of course, Lamar Jackson can rush for his own, scramble a little bit, but if you're going to be handing it off to a running back, there's no more deciding between Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Justice Hill. It's King Henry. He's there on a 2-year deal, which is really a 1-year deal. I think he could really lead the league in rushing touchdowns this late in his career, which would be phenomenal for fantasy football. We're used to Derrick Henry really just racking up points, running the ball. He's developed as a pass catcher over time, but I think a lot of his scoring this year is going to be from scoring rushing touchdowns. He's going to be worth the investment in fantasy football, probably going to be a first-round pick in a lot of leagues. Moving on here, we have the Buffalo Bills. And this is a player that I really like for 2024, and that is James Cook. James Cook, the fact I have here for the Buffalo Bills, James Cook was the RB5 on a points per game basis from week 11 to 17. Now, why is that significant? Well, week 17 is when most fantasy football championships are. Week 18, obviously, some teams aren't competing anymore, have a playoff spot locked up. But for fantasy football purposes, week 17 is usually when the season ends. That is when our championship is. So we like to look at that week as the final week to consider some of these stats here. But week 11 to week 17 for James Cook to finish as the RB5 is really significant because they changed offensive coordinators in Buffalo just prior to week 11. And that offensive coordinator that took over was Joe Brady. And he's now the official offensive coordinator, no longer interim. He is the offensive coordinator for 2024. So we have James Cook explode from RB29 weeks 1 through 10 to RB5 weeks 11 through 17 with a new offensive coordinator who's now his current offensive coordinator. And we know they lost Gabe Davis. They added Curtis Samuel. They're going to be doing a lot of fun things in Buffalo. Stephon Diggs, Dalton Kincaid are probably going to be the primary pass catchers, but James Cook doesn't really have any competition in that backfield right now. Like the Baltimore Ravens, who I just mentioned, obviously Lamar Jackson can run up there. Josh Allen's going to get his in the running game here, but as far as other running backs on the roster right now for James Cook to compete with, it's Ty Johnson and it's Darrington Evans. Not really guys you're worried about James Cook losing touches to. So I think they're going to add someone in the draft. It wouldn't surprise me if they do. But James Cook should have a massive 2024 season. The Buffalo Bills averaged 380.7 yards per game and 27 points per game with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. So with him now as the official offensive coordinator for 2024, James Cook as a primary role in that offense under Joe Brady, I think he's in for a huge 2024 season. We'll move on here to the Carolina Panthers, who a lot of people shied away from during the 2023 fantasy football season, and for good reason. They were kind of bad. Adam Thielen led all Panthers with a 25.6% target share in 2023. That is the fact I'm bringing to you for the 32 facts for 32 teams here. Thielen's 25.6% target share last season was his third most all time in his 11-year career. Obviously, he was with the Minnesota Vikings every year prior. It's also his highest since 2018. He led the Minnesota Vikings that year with 155 targets. So Adam Thielen, out of necessity, led the Panthers in targets last year. Massive target share, 25.6%. Well, the Panthers just traded for Deontay Johnson. And I don't think they're done adding to this receiving room. But Adam Thielen will not be leading this team with 25% target share in 2024. I can guarantee you that. Deontay Johnson, who is 6 years younger than Adam Thielen, is used to averaging about 8 targets per game. If you extrapolate that over a 17-game season, it comes out to about 141 targets. So I could expect that number for Deontay Johnson. He's reached that in 3 straight seasons from 2020 to 2022. Obviously, last year he had a hamstring injury. Quarterback play was bad in Pittsburgh, so he didn't do it then. But that's what Deontay Johnson is used to doing. He's a great separator. He's a trustworthy pass catcher. And I think Bryce Young is going to hone in on him as his favorite target. I don't think people are going to be paying up for Deontay Johnson in 2024 redraft leagues either. Adam Thielen last year, again, 25.6% target share, was like wide receiver 50 come August. No one was drafting Adam Thielen. If you were, he was a dart throw. Deontay Johnson, a little bit more of a recognizable name. He's younger than Adam Thielen, but I think you can get him in the double-digit rounds for fantasy football. I think he's a good anchor wide receiver 3 for most teams with wide receiver 2 upside. I'll move on now to the Chicago Bears, and this is one that I love to bring up because we are just waiting for someone to break this record. The fact I have for the Chicago Bears is that their all-time record for passing yards in a single season is 3,838 yards. And that was set by Eric Kramer in 1995. 1995, I was 3 years old. Pokemon hadn't really been invented yet. I think Toy Story might have been the #1 movie in the box office at some point. Yes, 1995, the all-time record for passing yards in a single season by a Bears quarterback was set. 1995, 3,838. I think at this point, after trading away Justin Fields, we can all expect the Chicago Bears to use the first overall pick on Caleb Williams. So I want to talk about Caleb Williams for a second because there's a lot of hate out there for Caleb Williams. Not only do I think at this point, should he be the 101 in Superflex, dynasty drafts, rookie drafts, but I think you can actually draft him in 2024 redraft leagues as well. They traded for DJ Moore last year, so we already had a top wide receiver on the roster, but then they just traded a 4th-round pick to get Keenan Allen here. And Keenan Allen had 108 receptions last year. That ranked 6th in the leagues, and he missed the final 4 games of the season. So ridiculous season for Keenan Allen. Now he joins the Chicago Bears with 1 year left on his contract. So I think they're going to get the most out of Keenan Allen as much as they can at this point. DeAndre Swift, too. He's going to lead the backfield. Signed a 3-year deal for the Chicago Bears. He's one of the best pass-catching backs in the league as of late. And then my point for Caleb Williams here is that he just needs to average 226 yards per game to break this record. That shouldn't be a problem with these kind of pass-catching options. And there's no debate that he's going to start week 1. When Justin Fields was drafted there, Andy Dalton started week 1. It was an absolute mess. New regime in Chicago. They're getting their guy in Caleb Williams. I think he's going to have an absolutely stellar rookie season. We were all hyped about C.J. Stroud last year, winning Offensive Rookie of the Year, topping 4,000 passing yards. I think Caleb Williams is going to do just that. Should be the Offensive Rookie of the Year, should top 4,000 passing yards. And I think he's going to be a QB1 in fantasy football. That's top 12. He has the rushing upside to him that I think he's going to apply to this team. Handing it off to DeAndre Swift here and there. But I think Caleb Williams is going to get his own as far as a runner goes as well. But Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift, no reason Caleb Williams shouldn't surpass 4,000 passing yards with the rushing upside and finish as a QB1 in fantasy football. Move on here to the Cleveland Browns, and we'll talk about Jerry Jeudy for a second. Jerry Jeudy has just 5 career games with 100 or more receiving yards. 5 career games. As a first-round wide receiver draft pick, he has 5 games of 100 receiving yards. It's not like Jerry Jeudy hasn't been playing football either. He's played in 57 career games, and just 5 of them he's topped 100 receiving yards. Now, granted, The quarterback play in Denver, we know, has not been great either, but Russell Wilson was there. Russell Wilson isn't awful, but Jerry Jeudy, just 5 games of 100 receiving yards is really just something that shocked me. Now he's a Cleveland Brown, and they gave him a 3-year extension. So I think they're just trying to get ahead of the market here. We saw DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, even Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin get 3-year deals a couple years ago, all for big money. Jerry Jeudy's contract is not only cheaper than those guys, but the guaranteed money is less. I think they're hoping he can revive his career in Cleveland. Amari Cooper is going to be a free agent wide receiver next year. Elijah Moore, they traded for last year. They didn't pay him. So Jerry Jeudy, I think, is in the plans for the Cleveland Browns. I think he's someone that a lot of people are low on, and you can buy low on in dynasty fantasy football formats as well. If you want to compare him to CeeDee Lamb for a second, who was drafted 2 picks later in the 2020 NFL draft, CeeDee Lamb has 18 games of 100-plus receiving yards. Jerry Jeudy, again, 5. So I think Jerry Jeudy's a sneaky pick. I think you should, maybe inquire whoever has him in your dynasty league, see if they're willing to give up Jerry Jeudy for maybe, a late second, early third. Actionable advice there. The too many mouths to feed theory could be going on in your dynasty league right now. Jerry Jeudy could be very available. He's someone I would buy low on. The Dallas Cowboys. We obviously know the Dallas Cowboys haven't done much this offseason, specifically at the running back position. And the fact I have for them is that Tony Pollard, who's now with the Tennessee Titans, leaves behind 307 total touches from last season. That's 252 carries included in those 307 touches. So who's going to take these touches away from Tony Pollard now that he's gone? They're career high numbers for Tony Pollard, by the way, who broke his leg in January prior to last season. So 9 months later, he played in every game last season and set career highs in touches and carries. The current depth chart is as follows. Rico Dowdle, Deuce Vaughn, Malik Davis, and Snoop Connor. Those guys combined for 137 touches last year. Combined, 4 guys, 137 touches. Tony Pollard, 307 touches. So we have a massive vacancy in this Dallas Cowboys backfield. So I think we can all agree that whoever the rookie running back they draft there is going to be a huge target for dynasty formats. Trey Benson, Marshawn Lloyd, Jonathan Brooks, Jalen Wright. I don't know who it's going to be. Whoever you think is your RB1 for fantasy football for dynasty formats right now might change just based on who Dallas drafts. Keep that in mind. Whoever ends up with the Cowboys in that backfield is going to be the RB1 for dynasty football. I guarantee that. Moving on here to the Denver Broncos, and we'll talk about their other wide receiver. We just talked about Jeudy for the Browns. Courtland Sutton. He scored a touchdown in 10 of 16 games played last season. Now, for those of you who had Courtland Sutton on your rosters, myself included, he was a set-and-forget player based on this alone. He had a 5-game stretch from early October to late November, crucial time in fantasy football, where he scored a touchdown in every game. It was phenomenal. Now, Denver's offense wasn't one that I was watching, on, weekly occasion, but I would get that update on my phone. Courtland Sutton receiving touchdown, various lengths too. 5 yards, 2 yards, 20 yards. Courtland Sutton was Russell Wilson's guy last year. Now, who's the quarterback in Denver? Right now, it's Jarrett Stidham. I don't feel great about that, but Courtland Sutton's really the only wide receiver of note there. He could end up getting traded. He could end up getting cut later, come June or so. But I think they want to keep him in there in case they draft a quarterback and need him to develop. So they want to keep Courtland Sutton there. The Denver Broncos offense is likely playing from behind in 2024 as well. They play in a division with the Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Raiders, who are kind of on the up and up as well. I think the Denver Broncos are going to pass a ton in 2024. And if Courtland Sutton is still there come week 1, come the time you're drafting, I think he's going to be a wide receiver 2 in fantasy football, just based on volume alone. Depending on where he's going in drafts, I will feel very comfortable snagging him. We're going to move on here to the Detroit Lions. And the fact I have for them is that David Montgomery logged 50 red zone carries to Jahmyr Gibbs' 37 last season. Now, granted, both of them missed time, but when all was said and done, David Montgomery, 50 red zone carries, Jahmyr Gibbs, 37. Even with slightly less work, though, Jahmyr Gibbs rushed for 11 fewer yards and just 3 fewer touchdowns. So 13 less carries and just 11 fewer yards. So Jahmyr Gibbs really efficient on his carries compared to David Montgomery. David Montgomery got stuffed a lot as they got in closer. Both of these guys were really efficient. Both of these guys were starter in fantasy football. Now, I think we can all expect Jahmyr Gibbs to have a much higher price tag in 2024. but that doesn't mean David Montgomery's going anywhere. Again, 50 red zone carries to Jahmyr Gibbs 37. The ceiling is so much higher for Jahmyr Gibbs just based on his pass catching. He's explosive. He could get more work and more touches in 2024. But do not forget about David Montgomery. And if someone just thinks Jahmyr Gibbs is just going to vault into this bell cow role, they're wrong. Dan Campbell is going to use both of these guys as he did last season, depending on game script. We know Gibbs' ceiling is very noticeable, but do not forget about David Montgomery next year. If you miss out on Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round of your drafts, that's okay. Target David Montgomery. The Green Bay Packers, the next team here that I want to give a fact for, and the fact I have is for a newcomer as well, and that's Josh Jacobs. 262 or more touches in every season of his career. Now, the 2022 NFL rushing leader, Josh Jacobs, has averaged 20.5 touches per game throughout his career as well. He's played in the NFL for 5 seasons, and he has an average of 300.4 touches per season. Just incredible workload for one of the best backs in fantasy football over the last couple of years. You knew what you were getting in Josh Jacobs every year you drafted him. And if you had him in 2022, you got more than you expected for. He was the rushing leader, and he was a top 5 RB. Aaron Jones, who he's replacing, surpassed 250 touches just twice in his career. And he never eclipsed 300 when he surpassed 250. So that said, I'm not entirely sure how many touches we can expect from Josh Jacobs. Is LaFleur, the head coach, going to give Jacobs the workload he's used to? Or is he going to give him an Aaron Jones workload and emphasize the pass? They have a ton of young pass catchers. They want Jordan Love to develop. I'm not so sure. Now, let's look at the rest of this backfield. A.J. Dillon is returning, but let's look a little deeper at that contract. When you look at A.J. Dillon's contract to return to the Green Bay Packers, as of right now, the cap hit is just $1.29 million. There's no guarantee A.J. Dillon's on this team in week 1. I do expect this team to add a rookie in the draft. They have 2 third-round picks, 2 fourth-round picks. So I could see them adding a younger, cheaper running back in the draft. Josh Jacobs himself signed a 4-year deal, but it's really only guaranteed money for 1 season. Josh Jacobs, depending on how this goes, could be gone after next year. So I definitely think we're going to see a rookie running back join the Green Bay Packers backfield. But when you look at the red zone carries, that's where I love Josh Jacobs for 2024. Last season, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon combined for 64 red zone rush attempts. A.J. Dillon, again, I don't think they want to give him the ball in the red zone based on the contract, based on, how shaky his availability is for this team. So I think Josh Jacobs, who had over 30 of his own as well, more than A.J. Dillon, more than Aaron Jones last year, I think he's going to see a ton of red zone touches. This is a team that is going to be in the red zone often. And last year, when they were in the red zone, they ranked 17th in scoring. They scored on just 53% of the red zone drives. And I think they brought in Josh Jacobs to help them in that regard. So Josh Jacobs is a guy that I think is going to see a bell cow role in Green Bay. And I think he's going to score a ton of touchdowns just as the guy out of that backfield in Green Bay when they get in close. The next team I have here is the Houston Texans. And the fact I have for them is that C.J. Stroud finished as the QB 11 on a points per game basis. All the stuff we heard about C.J. Stroud, and he finished as the QB 11. I think if you asked most people before I asked or gave you this fact, you would have thought he was a top 8 quarterback. Not the case. C.J. Stroud didn't really run, and we know at this point that mobile quarterbacks are key to fantasy football success. 12.6% of his fantasy points are from rushing production. He only had 167 rushing yards as a rookie, and he only had 136 rushing yards total as a quarterback at the collegiate level. C.J. Stroud's just not a guy that runs much, and they added Joe Mixon to this backfield. So I don't expect C.J. Stroud to all of a sudden just develop into this prolific running mobile quarterback. However, he has some great weapons down there in Houston. Nico Collins, Tank Dell. I think they're going to add another wide receiver in this draft, and Dalton Schultz at tight end. So if we want C.J. Stroud to continue on this path to being an elite fantasy quarterback, he has to continue to just dominate through the air. And I definitely think he can. This is nothing against C.J. Stroud, but if he does take a step back, even ever so slightly, we're talking about a fringe QB1, high-end QB2 for fantasy football. I want to keep in mind here that if C.J. Stroud is going as a top 6, 7 quarterback in fantasy drafts this year, I'm going to pass on that price. That's just drafting him at his absolute ceiling, and that's just not something I'm willing to do when I can get other quarterbacks who I think have higher ceilings and are going to be far cheaper in drafts next year. When I can get them a lot cheaper, I'm going to draft them over CJ Stroud. I'm going to wait. Let people buy into the hype. I love that Bobby Slowick is back there as the offensive coordinator, but CJ Stroud, again, needs to continue to dominate through the air to be a top 5, top 6, top 8 quarterback in fantasy football, even with as good of a season as he had last year, QB 11 on a points per game basis. He had 9 multi-score games, and he had 8 games with 1 touchdown or less, which is 0. So not really a boom or bust guy, but this is just a guy that I don't think we're going to see just have 2 passing touchdowns every game, especially, again, with Joe Mixon in that backfield. I do think they're going to use him quite a lot. A quarterback that I would draft instead of CJ Stroud, and I think I can get cheaper than CJ Stroud, is Indianapolis Colts rookie Anthony Richardson. And the fact I have for the Indianapolis Colts on this episode here is that he played in just 2 complete games as a rookie, but averaged 27.76 points per game in those 2 complete games. Obviously, we know the sample size is very, very small. This is 2 games. It's 2 games we're talking about. But we know the ceiling is high with Anthony Richardson. In 2 of 4 games played last season, he had 10 rush attempts. In the other 2 games, he scored a ton of fantasy points as well, rushing the football. Scored 8 total touchdowns in 4 games. And again, he only finished 2 of those games. The ceiling is absolutely massive for Anthony Richardson. And again, we know that mobile quarterbacks are invaluable for fantasy football. 50.6% of his fantasy points last year in 4 games was from his rushing production. Again, CJ Stroud, 12.6%. Anthony Richardson, 50.6%. Now, we expect him to be on the field a lot more, of course, if we're going to be drafting him. They did bring back Michael Pittman on a 3-year deal. They have Alec Pierce and Josh Downs there. Perhaps they add Brock Bowers at tight end. I don't know, but he's also going to get a full season out of Jonathan Taylor. So that should just make the offense a heck of a lot better with Jonathan Taylor back there for a full season. And Jim Irsay is not going to be trying to save a whale, hopefully, this offseason, so we can put aside that drama. Anthony Richardson, I think, with a full offseason, continuity at the coaching staff. Joe Flacco's his backup, so really no questions as to if Gardner Minshew should be starting instead. Anthony Richardson has a massive ceiling. I'm going to be taking him in a ton of drafts this year, especially if he goes round 8 or later in 1 QB leagues. The Jacksonville Jaguars fact I have for you here today on Fantrax Football Friday is that Evan Ingram had 143 targets last year, and that is the most amongst 2023 Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, why is this significant? Well, the next closest Jacksonville Jaguars to Evan Ingram last season in targets was Calvin Ridley, who's now a Tennessee Titan. He had 136 of his own. So the Jaguars did bring in Gabe Davis. However you feel about Gabe Davis, I don't feel great about Gabe Davis. He's never logged more than 93 targets in a single season, and he averages 74 per season. And Josh Allen was his quarterback. So Gabe Davis is not a guy I expect to just all of a sudden show up in Jacksonville and be Calvin Ridley. Don't expect that at all. Christian Kirk is still there. I think he gets a boost with Calvin Ridley's exit, but Evan Ingram has been a top 5 tight end on a points per game basis in the first 2 seasons he's been in Jacksonville. Now, I can already name 5 tight ends that are going to go ahead of Evan Ingram in drafts next year. That's Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, and probably Trey McBride. And we can continue on with that list, maybe with Dalton Kincaid, maybe Brock Bowers, depending on where he goes. So Evan Ingram continues to be a screaming value in fantasy football. Again, dynasty formats, not a big name. Some people are really down on the Jaguars right now. Volume is king for me. Evan Ingram led the team in targets last year, has a good shot to do it this year again, should at least finish second to Christian Kirk. Buy Evan Ingram. Draft Evan Ingram. I love Evan Ingram. Moving on here, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. And the fact I have for you here on this episode is that Patrick Mahomes' average depth of target for a touchdown pass last season was 3.9 yards. Threw a ton of touchdowns, and his average depth of touchdown pass in yardage was just 3.9. Now, that's down from 4.5 in 2022. This is a guy that won an MVP in 2022 and has won back-to-back Super Bowls in these past 2 years. And his average depth of touchdown pass has not exceeded 4.5 yards. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, it's no coincidence that Tyreek Hill has not been on the team for these 2 seasons as well. So what do? They bring in Marquise Brown, who runs a 4.27 40 at his pro day a couple years back. Absolute field stretcher, deep threat, better than Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I don't necessarily think that Marquise Brown is going to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football, but this is great news for Patrick Mahomes. I think he's going to have much more downfield production, much more big play potential. He throws a 50-yard bomb, perhaps for a touchdown to Marquise Brown. That is injecting massive fantasy points into your lineup every week. Patrick Mahomes has been a top 5 quarterback every season since becoming the Chiefs starter, except for last year. So you add Marquise Brown, you have Rashee Rice, you still have Travis Kelce there. Patrick Mahomes should be a top 5 quarterback again in 2024. Regain that status. If people are lower on him based on how last year went, the guys or girls that drafted Patrick Mahomes in their leagues vow to never do it again. Take that opportunity to do it yourself. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to be a top 3 quarterback. He still runs a little bit, but this should be another fantastic season for him and that entire Kansas City Chiefs offense, especially with the addition of Marquise Brown. We'll move on here to the Las Vegas Raiders, and one of my favorite players to target for 2024, as of now, we haven't had the draft, but as of now, is running back Zamir White. And the fact I have for you here for the Las Vegas Raiders is that Zamir White handled 84 total carries in the Raiders' final 4 games last season. Now, Josh Jacobs wasn't on the field for those, so this is significant. In the first 13 games of the season, Zamir White handled 20 carries total. 20 total carries in the first 13 games for Zamir White. Josh Jacobs hurts his leg, misses the rest of the season, the final 4 games, and Zamir White immediately handles 84 total carries. That is a huge, huge, huge increase in workload that interim head coach, now official head coach, Antonio Pierce, trusted him to do. I love that. Now, another good sign that they trust Zamir White is that they brought in Alexander Mattison as his backfield competition, or maybe just purely for depth. Alexander Mattison, as most of you know, who drafted him very, very high in 2023 fantasy football, I'm going to pat myself on the back. I went nowhere near Alexander Mattison last year. He did not show up as an RB1 for fantasy football or for the Minnesota Vikings for that matter. As soon as Ty Chandler jumped onto the scene, he looked just better than Alexander Mattison. So I don't really think Alexander Mattison is a true threat to Zamir White if these are the 2 backs in that backfield heading into the season. Again, they could add a rookie as well, but I think Zamir White is going to get every opportunity to be a bell cow back for this team. So Zamir White, definitely a guy that I'm targeting. And again, in these 4 games where he averaged 21 carries per game, he had 112 rushing yards and 145 rushing yards in 2 of them. Absolute baller, finally going to get a shot without Josh Jacobs in that backfield. The Los Angeles Chargers, and the fact I have for them for this episode is that Greg Roman is the offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers. Not really particular to any one player, and an obvious fact, just stating who their offensive coordinator is. Why is this important? They are going to run the football. That is not a secret at this point, especially with this hire and especially with some of their off-season moves. They have a quarterback already under contract in Justin Herbert, and they have the 5th overall pick. Now, there's rumors they want to trade out of that 5th overall pick because they obviously don't need a quarterback. They could use a wide receiver, but they could use a lot of things. They could use offensive line, too. I think if they actually stay put at 5th overall, they're going to draft an offensive lineman. They trade out, perhaps to the Minnesota Vikings, who need a quarterback. I think we're going to see the Los Angeles Chargers, get a bunch of draft capital and start building up that offensive line, retooling this team and this roster. So let's look at what Greg Roman means to the Los Angeles Chargers in 2024. Well, he was the Baltimore Ravens offensive coordinator from 2019 to 2022. During that time, the Baltimore Ravens ranked first, third, and 6th, respectively, in rush attempts per game. Now, granted, Lamar Jackson was their quarterback, very mobile quarterback. Justin Herbert can run too, but not quite like Lamar Jackson. Still, that doesn't mean that Lamar Jackson was running the entire offense or the only person running on that offense. They ran the football a ton in Baltimore under Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator. Some other moves the Los Angeles Chargers have made. They just signed center Bradley Bozeman, who was the Ravens starting center from 2019 to 2021. 3 seasons with Greg Roman as his offensive coordinator, is now the starting center for the Los Angeles Chargers. Another offseason move they made. They brought in Gus Edwards, who was the Baltimore Ravens running back from 2018 to 2023. He has Greg Roman ties too. I'm not saying that, Gus Edwards is going to be this amazing running back next year, but he's going to have a role. He's going to be a value for fantasy football. And they traded away Keenan Allen They let Mike Williams walk in free agency, now a New York Jet. All signs point to the Los Angeles Chargers running the football a ton in 2024. Keeping an eye on this backfield too. Everyone seems to think they're going to draft Michigan running back Blake Corum. And if they do, I'm going to target him over Gus Edwards. But don't forget about Gus Edwards. Greg Roman knows him, and he showed that he can get into the end zone last year, good in the red zone. So this is a team that's going to run a lot. And unfortunately, that, has me a little bit down on Justin Herbert. His wide receivers as of now, Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer, and that's really all I can name personally right now. I don't think this team is going to pass a ton in 2024, so get your hands on the running backs in this backfield. We'll stay in Los Angeles for the next team here, and the fact I have from the Los Angeles Rams is Puka Nacua. Let's talk about some Puka Nacua. He is one of just 12 wide receivers to record over 1,000 receiving yards as a rookie since the 2014 season. So over the last 10 seasons, just 12 rookie wide receivers have recorded over 1,000 receiving yards. Now, we know this wide receiver class coming in here is going to be one of the most sought after in fantasy football, especially for Dynasty of all time, perhaps. I was talking with a buddy from my Dynasty home league the other day, and we were trying to, mock up the first round in a 12-team league. We think 9 picks in a one-quarterback 12-team Dynasty league are going to be wide receivers. How many of them are going to record 1,000 receiving yards? Depends on where they end up. I think right now it's probably 2, maybe 3, which would be a lot, considering this fact here. But this is more about Puka Nacua. He has the all-time record for receiving yards in a rookie season for a pass catcher with 1,486. Now, is Puka Nacua a one-year wonder? I don't think so. If you actually, people are going to be looking for the next Puka Nacua, I think we should just be drafting Puka Nacua again. Very strong 2024 season, as we all know. And very quietly, the Los Angeles Rams offseason has been about building up the offensive line. They extended offensive lineman Kevin Dotson. They signed Jonah Jackson. And they signed free agent tight end Colby Parkinson from the Seattle Seahawks. Good run blocking tight end. That's 3 key signings to let you know that they're looking for protection up front. Matthew Stafford and even his wife Kelly have made indications that his career is coming to a close. This could be Matthew Stafford's final season in LA. We just saw Aaron Donald retire. Cooper Kupp's getting up there in age. Feels like those 3 were kind of this trio there with Sean McVay that we're all going to ride off into the sunset together. Aaron Donald's gone, but Matthew Stafford coming back perhaps for one more season. I love that for Puka Nacua. I think he's going to continue to dominate with Stafford. And his only competition for targets right now is Cooper Kupp, who's 31 years old and has a lengthy injury history. So everyone wants to tell you that Puka Nacua, he's never going to reach those numbers again. That may be true, but why can't he have 1,200 receiving yards and double-digit touchdowns in 2024? Sign me up. Good protection up front, continuity at the quarterback position. Sean McVay obviously loves him, and he's very talented. Get Puka Nacua on your rosters in 2024. That really isn't that hot of a take, but some people may be shying away because they were looking for the next big thing. We will move down to South Beach and discuss the Miami Dolphins, and the fact I have for them focuses on the backfield, and it's Raheem Mostert. Now, Raheem Mostert, as many of you know, was probably the best bang for your buck in 2023 as far as fantasy football goes. He tied Christian McCaffrey for a league-leading 21 total touchdowns last season. Vastly different players, vastly different in age, style of play, talent, role. But again, Raheem Mostert, 21 touchdowns. Christian McCaffrey, 21 touchdowns. Production matters, obviously. Raheem Mostert will be 32 in April. He also has a stunning 1,117 less touches than Christian McCaffrey, albeit 32 years old. There's a reason for that. Raheem Mostert, prior to last year, could not stay healthy. Now, Raheem Mostert was one of my biggest misses last year. I hated the Miami backfield last year. I wanted nothing to do with them, and I was proven wrong. In the year prior, 2022, the Miami backfield, the running backs in that room, combined for 9 touchdowns, rushing touchdowns. Raheem Mostert himself last year had 18. Who saw that coming? Not me, obviously. I didn't have Raheem Mostert on any of my fantasy rosters, but can we really expect that again? Raheem Mostert is not really a guy that I want to pay yesterday's price for today. If you look at this backfield again, they brought back Salvin Ahmed. They have Raheem Mostert still there under contract, and they have Devon Achane, who I think a lot of people are going to be targeting. But Could they add another back in that backfield to compete with these guys to maybe lessen the workload from Raheem Mostert? Will Raheem Mostert stay healthy? Knock on wood, I want nothing but the best for that guy. But again, I think people are going to see what he did last year and probably value him a little higher than they should be for 2024. Will he, have 21 total touchdowns again? Highly doubtful, but I guess it's possible. It's in the realm of possibilities. I love that idea when you got him undrafted last year, though, as opposed to paying a mid-round pick for him to maybe be a starting running back on your fantasy rosters next season. We're going to move to Minnesota and discuss the Minnesota Vikings here. The fact I have for them is more about their coaching staff, specifically head coach Kevin O'Connell. Since hiring him as the head coach in 2022, the Minnesota Vikings have ranked 3rd and 6th in pass attempts per game in O'Connell's first 2 seasons. Now, that drop from 3rd to 6th isn't that significant if you think about it. They went from 39.6 pass attempts per game in 2022 to just 37.1 pass attempts in 2023. Now, keep in mind, too, Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles. They rolled out rookie Jaron Hall. Then they rolled out Joshua Dobbs after trading a 6th-round pick for him, and then brought in Nick Mullins to try to, revive the system there. They had 4 quarterbacks last year, averaging 37.1 pass attempts per game, slightly down from the season prior with a full season of Kirk Cousins. I don't think they're going to continue, or I do think they're going to continue passing the ball. And I think that's why they're hell-bent on trading up in this draft and getting the quarterback of their future. They currently hold the 11th and the 23rd overall pick in the first round of this draft. We could see this weekend them trade up to maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, and get the position that they need to draft the quarterback. Is it J.J. McCarthy? Is it someone higher? Drake May, perhaps, that they're setting their sights on. Josh McCown, the quarterback's coach in Minnesota, coached Drake May in high school. Maybe he put in a good word, especially since he was on the Carolina Panthers staff last year, who I believe Josh McCown loved C.J. Stroud, and then they went on and drafted Bryce Young. So maybe he's trying to tell Kevin O'Connell, you got to get this Drake May guy. Maybe they do trade up into the top 3. Maybe they get lucky and Drake May's there for them a little bit later. But I think they're going to draft a quarterback. I know they're going to draft a quarterback, but I do think they're going to trade up and do so. And if they do so, I still think head coach Kevin O'Connell is going to keep his foot on the gas as far as the passing game goes. Again, 3rd and 6th in pass attempts per game the last 2 seasons. He's got Justin Jefferson there, Jordan Addison. TJ Hawkins is recovering from a knee injury, but I think this team is still going to pass a ton in 2024. And whoever the rookie is there under center could exceed expectations in his first season in doing so. But for now, we have to expect Sam Darnold's going to be there. And Sam Darnold in 2 QB league, Superflex leagues, could be a huge value if you decide to get him later in drafts. I try to pair him with the rookie that they draft, though, just in case there is a changing of the guard at some point mid-season. Another team that needs a quarterback, well, they need everything, is the New England Patriots. Whole new regime there. Tom Brady has not been there since 2020, and it's not a coincidence that their last 1,000-yard receiver was Julian Edelman in 2019. That's the fact I have for you for the New England Patriots. Julian Edelman, 1,117 receiving yards in 2019 is the last time the New England Patriots had a 1,000-yard receiver. Again, Tom Brady left in 2020. Coincidence? I think not, for Incredibles fans out there. New England is finally doing a hard reset, though. They got rid of Bill Belichick, bringing in Gerard Mayo, obviously, as the head coach. Or not bringing him in, elevating him to head coach. And they have the 3rd overall pick. I think they're going to stay put. I think they're going to get a quarterback. And in doing so, they also have Jacoby Brissett in there, a nice veteran presence to coach up this quarterback. Now, let's look at the wide receivers on that roster. Do you think there's a 1,000-yard receiver in this mix here? Juju Smith-Schuster, KJ Osborne, Demario Douglas, Tyquan Thornton? I don't think so. This is probably an offense I'm going to continue to avoid in redraft leagues. Maybe try to get one of these guys, Demario Douglas perhaps, on the cheap in dynasty formats. But until they get an alpha wide receiver in that locker room, I'm not touching this passing game with a 10-foot pole. Now, the Patriots have the 3rd overall pick. They also have the 35th overall pick. We know this is a deep wide receiver class. It's very feasible we see them get a quarterback at 3 and a wide receiver at 35. We've seen teams do that in the past. Joe Burrow drafted 1st overall in 2020. T. Higgins 33rd overall in 2020 as well. So I think the Patriots are going down that path. They're going to put a rookie in there to pair with Jaden Daniels. And we also saw C.J. Stroud last year putting a good word for Tank Dell. I'm going to be paying close attention to whoever they draft in the first round and who they pair with that player in the second, perhaps third round in the draft. So again, New England Patriots, no 1,000-yard receiver since 2019. Don't really think that continues unless a hot rookie comes in second round to pair with Drake May, Jaden Daniels, whoever they grab at third overall. We're going to go to the New Orleans Saints, and the fact I have for them is that Chris Olave is averaging 46.5 more targets per season than the next closest Saints pass catcher in each of Chris Olave's first 2 seasons. That might be a little bit, difficult to understand there, but Chris Olave, top target in New Orleans, is averaging nearly 50 more targets per season than the next closest guy in New Orleans. So Chris Olave continues to be a massive value, the guy in New Orleans. Shouldn't surprise anyone that the next closest target in each of the first 2 seasons has been Alvin Kamara. And it should be a little bit surprising that Alvin Kamara missed the first 3 games in 2023 with a suspension and then missed week 18 based on the Saints not, being in the playoffs. They decided to sit Alvin Kamara. So still second in targets on the Saints despite missing 4 games last year. Chris Olave had 138 targets in 2023. I'd love to see that number go up. I'm just not so sure it does. Don't love Derek Carr there. Don't love him for Chris Olave's value. The New Orleans Saints are not a really team that anyone, thinks of when they think of targeting pass catchers because they've been doing the same thing for year after year. And that's kind of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting the same result. Since Drew Brees, their quarterback room has been a mess. They paid Derek Carr a boatload of money, and it just hasn't been good down there. So kind of a team I'm avoiding. The ceiling, I feel, is capped for Chris Olave. Depending on where people are drafting him, he might be a second-round pick in 2024 redraft leagues. They should add another pass catcher here, especially with Michael Thomas gone. Chris Olave is obviously better when Michael Thomas is not on the field, more targets for him. But if someone is willing to offer you a first-round pick in dynasty formats, perhaps more for Chris Olave, I might take that deal. I'm just not so sure that he's ever going to be anything better than he has thus far in his career. We're going to move on to the New York Giants. And the target leader over the Giants' last 6 seasons have been as follows. Different guy every year. Odell Beckham Jr., talking a couple years ago, 6 years. Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram, Kenny Galladay. Sorry, I just threw up in my mouth. Saquon Barkley and Darius Slayton. These are 6 different target leaders for the New York Giants over the last 6 seasons. Just no continuity to this offense whatsoever. Ton of injuries, ton of guys leaving, whether they were waived, traded, cut, what have you, signed elsewhere in free agency. It's just been a mess in New York, and I don't really see it improving anytime soon unless they draft Malik Neighbors 6th overall. Sorry. Again, different player leading the team in targets over the last 6 seasons. What's even worse is that Beckham and Ingram are the only 2 guys in this list that have seen over 100 targets as well. Darius Slayton has been the leading target getter for the past couple of years and has never eclipsed 100 yards or 100 targets. Forgive me. I believe Darren Waller is going to retire. It hasn't been announced yet. I kind of think he's screwing them over, but look at some of their moves. They brought in Jack Stoll from the Eagles, tight end there. They signed Chris Manhertz, another tight end. They have Bellinger already on the roster. So they have 3 tight ends there outside of Darren Waller. All signs are pointing to me that he's not going to be there anymore. And he was second in targets last year. So there are a ton of targets up for grab in New York. As of now, it's Daniel Jones starting week 1. Kind of think it could be Drew Lock. Don't love it. Not really touching this offense for 2024. But if they use high draft capital on a wide receiver, it's going to be hard not to throw a dart at that player in redraft leagues especially. I think that player could actually be a value in dynasty drafts just because people are, kind of icky on the Giants there. But if it's Malik Neighbors, he should probably still be wide receiver 2 off the board. We'll stay in New York, really New Jersey, and stick with the Jets here. And I want to talk about one of my guys, and that's Breece Hall. Can't get enough of Breece Hall. Give me 1 second here. The fact I have for the New York Jets, and specifically Breece Hall, is that he had just 1 carry inside the 5-yard line last season. Now, all things considered, when you think about the Jets' 2023 season, it is absolutely amazing that Breece Hall was the RB8 on a points per game basis. He averaged 16.3 points per game last season. Think of who their quarterbacks were. Aaron Rodgers for 4 plays. Zach Wilson. I think Trevor Siemian got in some work there at some point. The New York Jets scored just 15.8 points per game on the field. That's an NFL roster scoring 15.8 points per game, the 4th least amount amongst all 32 teams. And Breece Hall still managed to finish inside the top 10 with only one red zone carry. Or I'm sorry, one 5-yard line or 5 yards and in carry. Forgive me there. Breece Hall on an offense that has beefed up their offensive line. They brought in Morgan Moses. They traded for Tyron Smith. I'm sorry, they signed Tyron Smith, traded for Morgan Moses on the offensive line. Hopefully we see Aaron Rodgers healthier next season. They brought in Mike Williams to stretch the field, move the ball downfield. And Breece Hall is the guy in that backfield. I think Breece Hall has a clear path to RB1 overall in 2024. Probably won't be drafted as such because people are still obviously in love with Christian McCaffrey. More on him later. Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, a ton of guys that are going to be of interest, but Kyren Williams. But Breece Hall, if you can get him as like the 5th or 6th overall pick in your drafts next season, I would take it. This offense should be a lot better. They've beefed up the offensive line. Breece Hall, again, RB8 on a points per game basis with just one carry inside the 5-yard line. If he gets 10, I feel so much better about him scoring more fantasy points in 2024, something I expect him to do. Going to be one of the top RBs I'll be targeting. I'm going to probably rank him inside my top 3 when my rankings come out later this year. The Philadelphia Eagles, the fact I have for them, good time to take a sip of water out of my Eagles cup. Go Birds. The fact I have for the Philadelphia Eagles is that Jalen Hurts and DeAndre Swift account for 90% of the Eagles' rushing touchdowns in 2023. That's 5 from DeAndre Swift and 15 from Jalen Hurts. We all know the tush push. I know it's not going anywhere, but now they have Saquon Barkley. How often are the Eagles going to be, one, deploying the tush push close to, in the end zone or closer in the red zone? How often is Saquon Barkley going to get caught at the 3-2-1 yard line like DeAndre Swift did? I don't know. But DeAndre Swift also is leaving behind 5 of his own. Jalen Hurts scoring 15 touchdowns on the ground again in 2024, not something I'm willing to bet on. So, you take the 5 away from Swift, you take a couple away from Jalen Hurts. Clear path for Saquon Barkley to score 10, maybe more rushing touchdowns in 2024. When we look at the rush attempts, Hurts and DeAndre Swift account for 75.6 of the 2023 carries, with DeAndre Swift leading the way with 229. If the Eagles are to go the distance next year and compete for a Super Bowl, I don't think they want Jalen Hurts getting hurt, which he was last year. We saw him very, very slowed down, dying a knee brace at times. So enter Saquon Barkley, who should push closer to 275 carries, in my opinion. He's averaged 16.2 carries per game in his career. Extrapolate that over a 17-game season, which we hope for Saquon. But he's only played more than 16 in 2 of 6 years in his NFL career. So, it's hard to imagine Saquon Barkley staying healthy for a full season as well. But DeAndre Swift running behind that offensive line, these guys are going to take hits. We know that. DeAndre Swift was always banged up in Detroit. Last year, behind the Eagles' offensive line, played in every single game. So high hopes for Saquon. Doesn't really kill Jalen Hurts' value too much, but I do think Saquon Barkley is going to be a top 10 running back easily in 2024. Should have a much better season than DeAndre Swift. And I think he's going to score a ton of touchdowns. I don't think we can really count on Jalen Hurts scoring 15 rushing touchdowns again in 2024. Staying in Pennsylvania, we'll go with the Pittsburgh Steelers across the state. It's about 6 hours away if you're driving. And their quarterback situation is very interesting, as we all know. Russell Wilson, Justin Fields currently cost the Steelers a combined $4.5 million. Now, I put out an article on fantraxhq.com. You guys should check it out. I'm pretty much, sliding a little paper across the desk asking people a question. When will Justin Fields start for this team? Are we so sure that Russell Wilson is going to be the week 1 starter? Because I'm not. He signed a $1.2 million veteran minimum deal. Obviously, the Steelers saw an opportunity and traded for Justin Fields for a conditional 6th that elevates to a 4th if he plays 51% of the snaps. A little bit more than half next year. I believe the Steelers are going to negotiate a new deal with Justin Fields. As of right now, he's on the books for $3.3 million. Next season, though, if they exercise his 5th-year option, it's $25 million he's going to cost the Steelers, fully guaranteed. Now, they have to make that decision on Justin Fields by May 2nd. That's very, very soon. And he won't even have played a snap for the Pittsburgh Steelers yet. So look at what the Green Bay Packers did last year with Jordan Love. Obviously, not a ton of playing time with Aaron Rodgers there for so many seasons. He had his fifth-year option looming as well. They negotiated a 2-year deal, paid him more last season, paid him less for this season. But all in all, helps the team and gives Jordan Love a chance to prove it himself, but while still getting a lot of guaranteed money up front. I expect the same thing with Justin Fields next year in Pittsburgh. I think we're going to hear sometime in April, they're going to negotiate a 2-year deal for Justin Fields, giving him more money for 2024, more than the $3.3 million he's due already, more than Russell Wilson's $1.2 million. Don't you think they'd like to know if Justin Fields is the future of this franchise? He could straight up beat Russell Wilson in training camp. We could also see a situation like we did in Minnesota a couple years back. For those of you who don't know, Teddy Bridgewater was going to be the week 1 starter for the Vikings. Non-contact knee injury in training camp, left without a quarterback, had aspirations to make the playoffs. They called the Eagles, who had Sam Bradford, yes, Sam Bradford, and Carson Wentz, rookie, on the roster. And they traded for Sam Bradford. We could see a very similar situation here. If there's an injury elsewhere at the quarterback position in the league, that teams are going to call the Steelers and say, hey, we know Russ is only there for $1.2 million. We'll give you a third for him. I don't know. Not that crazy of an idea, considering that they have Fields ready to go. And those teams might need Russell Wilson's services for 2024, depending on who the team is, depending on the injury suffered by a quarterback in training camp. Again, we're not hoping for that, but these are just ideas that we got to start thinking about. There's more of a likelihood, in my opinion, that Justin Fields starts week 1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers over Russell Wilson, based on everything laid out here. Again, more discussion on that on an article that I wrote for Fantrax at fantraxhq.com. Look for that there. We'll move on here to the San Francisco 49ers. And I got to approach this somewhat softly because I could upset a lot of people. I want everyone to know right now. Hold on, where is it? Right there. I have a Christian McCaffrey rookie card. I am a huge Christian McCaffrey fan. Always have been. Panthers, 49ers, one of my favorite players. Christian McCaffrey, the fact I have for you for the San Francisco 49ers is that Christian McCaffrey has 1,948 career total touches, including the playoffs. That's getting close to 2,000, which he obviously will surpass this season. I know none of us are fading Christian McCaffrey in 2024 fantasy football leagues. And if you have him on your dynasty roster, you might as well ride him at this point. Unless, you're rebuilding and there's a win now team that wants to give you a crazy package for him. But I can't help but think that we're drafting Christian McCaffrey next season. Again, like Raheem Mostert, who I talked about earlier on this stream. I feel like we're drafting Christian McCaffrey in 2024 based on what he did in 2023, based on what he's done throughout his entire career. And I get it. Should he be the first overall pick in 2024 drafts? More likely than not, yes. But I don't feel great about it because he had a ton of touches has had a ton of touches in his career, but he had a ton of touches last year for the San Francisco 49ers. Going to the Super Bowl is the latest Christian McCaffrey has ever played in his entire career. Obviously, he was stuck on the Carolina Panthers and their dreadful team for years, but 417 touches for McCaffrey last year, including the playoffs. The second time in his career he's reached over 400 touches in a single season. The last time was 2019. He had over 1,000 rushing yards, over 1,000 receiving yards. The highest scoring fantasy football player at any position in 2019. Well, go to 2020. After such a crazy workload, he only played 3 games. I'm not saying that's going to happen again with Christian McCaffrey, but played until mid-February, 417 touches in 2024, close to 2,000 career total touches in general. I'm nervous. Do not mistake my concern for criticism. Nothing against Christian McCaffrey. Again, there's his rookie card. Huge Christian McCaffrey fan. But if I have a top 3 pick in redraft leagues, number 1 off the board is Jefferson. Number 2 is Jamar Chase. And I'm sitting there at 3. I'm nervous. I feel very pressured at that point to draft Christian McCaffrey. I would love to have pick like 5, 6, 7 and hope that he's gone by then so I don't have that pressure. We can't predict injuries. We just can't. But the NFL is a very physical game, not only taking hits, but a lot of toll on your body with such heavy workload. Christian McCaffrey, 417 touches last year, 1,948 in his career. I'm nervous. That's all I'll say. Seattle Seahawks staying in the division. The fact I have for them is that DK Metcalf has finished higher than wide receiver 14 one time in his first 5 seasons in the NFL. He had a wide receiver finish on a points per game basis in 2020. It's been 3 seasons since then. He's been the wide receiver 14, 16, and 21 since then. And for those of you keeping score at home, that's getting worse in ranking. Shocker, right? 14 to 16 to 21. The 2024 season will be Metcalf's first season without Pete Carroll as the head coach. Don't know how much that matters, but what I do think it matters for is that Mike Macdonald, defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, is now the head coach in Baltimore. So we want to turn our attention to who is the offensive coordinator now for the Seattle Seahawks. And it's Ryan Grubb. Notably, as University of Washington's offensive coordinator in 2022, he had an offense that generated the first most passing yards per game in college football, 369.8 during the 2022 season. Geno Smith, if he averages that many yards per game, will shatter NFL records. Obviously, we're not expecting that from Geno Smith in 2024, but we could see a more pass-heavy approach here in Seattle under Ryan Grubb as the offensive coordinator. Unfortunately for DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett is back on a rework deal, but he's getting up there in age. And Jackson Smith-Njigba is just getting started, only entering his second NFL season. So it's really hard for me to imagine going into the 2024 season ranking DK Metcalf as anything higher than a wide receiver 2. You know, if you go running back early, maybe draft a quarterback high, DK Metcalf's your wide receiver 1. That's where I start to get a little nervous. I don't know if he can really sustain a full season as a wide receiver 1 on a points per game basis for fantasy football at this point. But again, some encouraging signs. Pass heavy approach, perhaps from the new offensive coordinator. Continuity with Geno Smith out there as the quarterback. He'll be back. But unfortunately, he does have a little bit of a competition for targets still there with Lockett and Jackson Smith-Njigba coming back. So I'm going to be ranking DK Metcalf probably closer to wide receiver 15 to 20 as opposed to wide receiver like 10 to 15. Not much of a change, but he's just not really hit that ceiling that we've hoped for such a good player, as far as NFL goes. But for fantasy football, a lot of meat left on the bone for DK Metcalf. We got to wrap up here because we're getting a little bit over an hour, and we're going to move to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Rachaad White, the fact I have for him and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, handled 75.5% of Tampa Bay's running back carries last year and 76% of their touches out of the backfield. He survived free agency and the draft last year. And what does that mean? Well, they lost Leonard Fournette last year in the offseason and didn't really replace Leonard Fournette with anyone of note. And guess what? Rachaad White was the RB9 on a points per game basis. Riddle me shocked. I had him on a ton of rosters because of this. This is the stuff we want to be paying attention to with free agency and the draft. And as of now, Rachaad White has survived free agency. Most of the most notable backs have been taken off the free agency board, which leaves the NFL draft. What are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going to do? I think with Baker Mayfield coming back, with Mike Evans coming back, their win now window is still open. And I don't think drafting a running back with high draft capital really helps the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Rachaad White could survive the 2024 NFL draft and remain an RB1 for fantasy football. He handled 272 carries last year. And the other running backs on the roster, namely Chase Edmonds and Sean Tucker, who are the only running backs on the roster right now, handled a combined 64. Looking at the competition in the current backfield for Tampa Bay, it's Rachaad White, and it's really it. He's going to be an RB1 for fantasy football again in 2024. Who knows if they'll ever re-sign him based on how the running back market's gone. But Rachaad White is a guy I love for the 2024 fantasy football season. Still think the Buccaneers add a running back on day 3, but not by any means are they going to use a high draft pick on one. 2 more teams here. The Tennessee Titans. Again, very simple fact here is that their new head coach is Brian Callahan, and their new offensive coordinator is Nick Holtz. Callahan is the former offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. Nick Holtz is the former passing game coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Why is that significant? Well, the Bengals and the Jaguars both ranked inside the top 7 in pass attempts per game last year. Obviously, the Bengals didn't have Joe Burrow for a full season, but Jake Browning came in and had some success actually under Brian Callahan. But this is really significant because we're moving away from this Tennessee Titans team that has been so run heavy over the past really decade, but significantly so over the past couple of years with Derrick Henry. And we're moving into probably a more pass heavy approach. when you look at, the Jacksonville Jaguars and Bengals, again, both in the top 7 last year in pass attempts per game, got Callahan and Nick Holtz joining this coaching staff. Look at the Tennessee Titans. They haven't ranked inside the top 20 in pass attempts per game since 2013. What were you doing in 2013? Well, I'll tell you what, the Tennessee Titans were passing, and since then they haven't really done that. The new coaching hires, plus Calvin Ridley and Tony Pollard, encourage me to think that Will Levis is going to get every shot to be a QB1 in fantasy football with a very pass-heavy approach. We could actually see Will Levis have a very similar season to what we saw Sam Howell have last year in Washington. Howell led the league in pass attempts. Now, was he great for fantasy football? He was fine. Was he great for the Commanders? Absolutely not. They have a second overall pick, but 22 total passing touchdowns, 21 interceptions. My thoughts on the interceptions are, if your league does -1 point for an interception, who cares? That's not that huge of a deal if Will Levis is throwing for 250 yards per game, maybe 2 passing scores in multiple games this season. So Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, Treylon Burks, Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears. I love me some Will Levis for 2024. Pass-heavy approach, perhaps with the new head coach and offensive coordinator. So really, really like Will Levis to have a high-volume, low-end QB1, perhaps, fantasy football season in 2024. The last fact here I have for one fact for every NFL franchise, every NFL team here on today's Fantrax Football Friday is that the Washington Commanders allowed 30.5 points per game last season to their opponents. That was the most of any team, the only team to allow 30 or more points per game per season. Now, why is this significant? Well, let's look at what they've done this offseason. Dan Quinn, head coach, former defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys, who have been absolutely stellar as far as defense goes down there in Dallas. And let's look at some of their free agent signings. Dante Fowler, Frankie Louvu, Jeremy Chin, Clelin Ferrell, Bobby Wagner. Not much of a surprise here that they're emphasizing the defense. Now, these guys aren't the youngest group of defensive, assistants here coming in, but there's definitely talent, and there's definitely going to be a good locker room there as far as defensive culture building here in Washington. And that's really what they need, because they're going to use that second overall pick on a quarterback. They have Terry McLaurin under contract. They have Jahan Dotson. They have Brian Robinson out of the backfield. They brought in Austin Eckler. I'm not going to say that this offense is set, but it's better than most for a lot of rookie quarterbacks entering the league. So if they can tighten up the screws a little bit on defense, I think the Washington Commanders can turn things around quicker than you might think. Not saying that their defense is going to be a top defense in fantasy football, but hey, they could be a nice streaming option week to week. That's going to do it here for me today on Fantrax Football Friday. My name is Colin McTamany. This was 32 facts for 32 teams, 1 fact for every team. We are doing a ton of stuff over on Fantrax. I myself have been writing a ton of stuff for football with the draft coming up, with free agency kind of behind us at this point, but we have a ton of graphics out there. We just have a ton of articles coming out. If you play fantasy baseball, we're less than a week away from opening day. Download the Fantrax app today. I actually just started a league yesterday with a bunch of friends. We're in a draft here. My phone has been blowing up during the stream. I might be on the clock actually on a slow draft, but play fantasy baseball on Fantrax. Play college fantasy football on Fantrax. One of our guys, John Lobb, just released his college fantasy football rankings on fantraxhq.com. We're talking about all these prospects coming into the draft. Why aren't we, getting as much value as we can out of them by playing college fantasy football? Start a league today on Fantrax. It's the best place to play college fantasy football. I guarantee it. But stay with us here for the NFL offseason, because there really is no offseason. I'm going to be doing streams here every week, once a week on Fridays. So check those out. Check out fantraxhq.com for a ton more content, and have a good weekend. It's March Madness above all else. Best time of the year. Tons of games on. Hopefully you win your bets. Hopefully you hit those block pulls. And hopefully, if you are a college basketball fan, your team makes it into next week. I'll catch you guys next Friday here for another episode of Fantrax Football Friday. I'm Colin McTamany. Take it easy.